While there's growing recognition of the ocean's potential as a powerful source of solutions to mitigate and adapt to climate change, much remains to be done to accelerate and scale up ocean-based climate action. Today, we're going to talk about mangroves, these extraordinary salt-tolerant trees with 1 foot on land and 1 in the ocean. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this ocean podcast as a collaboration between afikra and Community Jameel. My name is Heather Koldewey, and I'm a marine conservationist who leads the Bertarelli Foundation's Marine Science Programme based at the Zoological Society of London. I'd like to start by introducing my guest, Myisha Ahmad. Myisha, welcome.
Hello, Heather. Good morning, and absolutely excited to be here. Thank you very much, and very delighted to talk about mangrove, which is one of the most important factor in the climate change scenario at the moment. And I am very lucky to be working at the interface between science and practice, very closely working with the communities in the coastal area in the southern part of Bangladesh.
Fantastic. And we've both been lucky to spend time in the Sundarbans in Bangladesh. Perhaps to give some context, that is the largest mangrove forest in the world, and just this incredible ecosystem, but also a very dynamic place where many communities depend on the mangroves and associated fisheries, etc., for their livelihoods. It's also a mangrove forest that spans between India and Bangladesh. And in India, Community Jameel has worked in this ecosystem to really help over 10,000 families rebuild their lives after a series of cyclones and extreme weather events. This is a real challenge that we're facing right now with climate change, the increased unpredictability and severity of storms and the impact those have on communities. And so we need to look at how we adapt to climate change. And that's something that Community Jameel has led by building and supporting more resilient livelihoods and protecting and restoring mangroves. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what mangroves actually do, these sort of little coastal trees to help coastal communities?
Around 3 million people are actually living along the coastal part of the Bangladesh region only. And 7.5 millions are dependent on directly and indirectly on the Sundarban ecosystem. That's a huge ecosystem we are talking about. That's just Bangladesh's part, right? Sundarban literally translates to a beautiful forest. It adds beauty to not just the ecosystem, but the life of the people. The greatest benefit of such trees is that it protects the coastal area from climatic hazards, mostly from cyclone, water logging, tidal surges, you name it, which are most vulnerable climatic hazards in the coastal areas. The mangroves are also the best space for the biodiversity, right? In the Bangladesh's part alone, there are around 2,000 different species of plants and animals thriving. So it's human, it's plants, it's flora, fauna, and it's beautiful natural way of water management as well. The culture that exists surrounding the mangroves in the coastal part, our music, our culture, our myths, our stories are very much influenced by the mangrove itself. So it is the source of life for them. You have talked about the uncertainty surrounding the climate change scenario. Yes, it is very much impacting how people look at the mangroves at the moment. They are a savior more than ever, but also economic devastation is an issue. How do we then define or redefine mangroves at this point? And that's where also the gender perspective comes in. Who takes the responsibility of the Sundarban ecosystem?
I want to sort of explore that, the importance of women empowerment and involvement a little bit more, where women are often marginalised from certain efforts, particularly conservation and restoration efforts, which can sort of push women out of some of their natural livelihoods. So where do you see and what examples have you seen of the women, and how, if with a bit of a chance and an opportunity and their voices being heard, we can actually see that difference from involving them versus marginalizing them?
Women has shown exceptional resilience to this whole system, as well as intelligence and acceptance, right? Especially in these areas which are very, very vulnerable to climate crisis. There is no doubt that climate affects very differently men and women. But then how the climate is being dealt with is also very different from men and women, right? And women were not just living and thriving in the ecosystem, but they're actually also very much actively deciding on very important factors like the nutrition in the family, for example. Women have to make sense of that ecosystem. So trying to make or grow ownership of that mangrove with the women has been very successful because of how women feel about nurturing the nature along with their day-to-day life.
Yet we find ourselves talking about local knowledge, culture, anthropology, and all of the things that actually driving protection in the Sundarbans and elsewhere. But these voices are not at the big international tables. They're not interacting with big business. They're very much doing things in the way that they've done. And we know that the best protected areas in the world are managed through local indigenous peoples or through local communities. So how do you think we should be working to increase awareness of where solutions lie, which are often in the hands of local communities or indigenous people?
You have made an important point about thinking like an engineer, which is very, very challenging part, because we unfortunately only understand numbers. Yeah, 50 acres of land planted, put the mangroves there. In 5 years of time, it should be able to sequester certain amount of carbon. Yes, targets are nice, but it's really important to understand the bottom-up story as well. Awareness needs to be within us as well, us as practitioners, us as scientists, us as scientific community, and those who are designing the project, as much as the local communities. Yeah.
I think we are moving towards a new shift there with much greater awareness about this issue, but always a long way to go. The other challenge you touched on at the beginning about the Sundarbans is it's not just how Bangladesh chooses to do it, but this is a forest that doesn't recognize international borders or boundaries, nor do the fish that swim between it. But it is a forest that encompasses it is in both India and Bangladesh. So how does that geography and the different national priorities play out in this single ecosystem? And what are the challenges there?
A very challenging part of all the efforts of adaptation actually lies in this very fact that the forest or the nature doesn't really recognize the border. Bangladesh and India has a lot, as we speak, we are having a lot of efforts from not just the government side, but also the NGOs, the civil organizations, the local communities, all are working, trying to work hand in hand to protect the mangrove equally, right? But still, the national priorities, the economic development curve, all these are different critical aspect that kind of drives how the forest is actually managed this side of the border to that side of the border. From 2011 onwards, there is an MOU signed between the government of India and Bangladesh on the conservation of Sundarban. But still, although there are efforts, great policies in place, but in terms of implementation, and that's the challenge of centuries, right? We talk about, we can put policies in place and numbers in place, but what does those numbers actually mean on ground if you are not following that? And if both the governments are coming together to unfortunately break both the laws, then that's efforts from local communities, civil organizations, NGO would mean only so much. So, however, I would say that there are, from the scientific aspect, from the academia, there is a huge positive and commendable efforts to understand the ecosystem and the culture. There is a beauty in synchronizing the culture and the music. I always talk about it because there is so much information in our stories and folklores and myths that needs to be decoded to understand the climate consequences over centuries in the Sundarban. Only if we understand the historic consequences, we would then be able to better understand the present and then better design the future, right?
I love the idea that perhaps people who haven't traditionally seen themselves as having a role to play, that we're all part of the solution, and actually coming from different backgrounds and perspectives is so important. But let's zoom out, as it's very timely for us to have this conversation. We're about to head into the 28th Conference of the Parties to really look at how the world's addressing climate change. What's your hopes for COP28?
COP is always about making sense of how much are we capable of protecting, and who is responsible, who should take the responsibility, and how much could we protect and restore or combat, right? As much as we are hopeful that yes, at the very end, it took 28 COPs to talk about mangroves, but we are talking about it. That's a good start. We are talking about it. We have pushed the international community. The scientists have put a lot of effort to bring all these conversations in this very important platform. Again, how much should we give importance to adaptation versus mitigation? That is a very important and critical conversation that needs to be understood and heard of in the COP conversations regarding mangroves, because when we talk about mangroves or nature-based solution in the global north versus global south, we are talking about really different perspectives here.
Thank you. That's a lot to think about, but a lot to take out of this conversation. I think as two scientists from the global north and the global south with a shared passion for environment and people, I think we need to share that message to others listening, that we hope the message of hope and optimism is shared, but also an urgency of time and recognizing how every day people are living with the consequences of climate change.
Thank you, Hitar, for making me think, rethink, and appreciate everything we have at the moment.
Thank you for reminding me that lots of my hope and optimism comes from time working in Bangladesh with inspiring Bengali people. So thank you.